And welcome to Barrel Age Faith. Today I have two special guests on with me today, Dr. Timothy Patitsas and Jonah Martin. They're joining us. Jonah's the not managing editor, but manager of St. Nicholas Press, which published Dr. Timothy's book, The Ethics of Beauty. There it is, this wonderful book, 750 pages of gold. And we've got Dr. Tim joining us today in person. And we're going to be talking about his book and so much more. So thanks for coming on, Dr. Tim. And I gotta unmute him. There we go.
Yeah, it's thanks for having me, Kyle. It's good to be your guest.
Well, it's a joy. I've been wanting to have you on for a while. Reading through your book has been an amazing experience, and I would encourage anybody, if they want to check this book out. I'm going to share the screen real quick because I've got the website real quick, and I want to do this now so I don't forget. But The Ethics of Beauty you can find on St. Nicholas Press, and there's the screen. You can find the book right there. The price is $53, but this is like 5-6 books in one. So you got to think of it like this, and it would make a great Christmas present for somebody. But we'll be talking about the book a little bit more, so everyone knows what it's all about. So today we're going to be talking about, first of all, the theme of civilization, which is your last chapter, Dr. Tim, which is called The City as Liturgy. And this chapter to me was profound. I found it very complimentary. I just listened to Paul Kingsnorth talk against civilization that he gave to First Things, and I couldn't stop thinking about this chapter in particular of your book. And so I kind of wanted to focus on a little bit, what does it mean to be a Christian civilization? What does the word Christendom mean? Are these good terms that we should be using? What are the problems? And then what's the Orthodox approach to engaging civilization? Should we just flee to the caves and the countrysides? Or is there an actual way to approach the city and civilization?
Yes, a cave. Should I jump in, or is it?
Yeah, go ahead and jump in. Should we flee to the caves?
I mean, I just don't think that there's one answer for every human being. I think, if you're the chief of police, you have to, you're a particular kind of servant of civilized order, and your approach to civilization, your understanding of what it is and what it costs, is going to be marked by your Christian faith. The same if you're a school teacher, head of a hospital, if you are, a family woman, family man, whatever your role in society is, you're sort of aiming, at promoting civilization. Now, you may not be in a position where you're aiming at that directly, because Christ said a little leaven raises the whole loaf. The point of the city as liturgy, one of the points is that there's this very interesting type of city genesis where hermits make cities arise. So the hermit goes to the desert, or it could be, a remote wilderness, let's say in the Eastern European case in the Middle Ages. The hermit's holiness draws co-strugglers. The co-strugglers invite more, and then pilgrims. And then this becomes the ideal place in a dark age, or in a time of social unrest and chaos, to live, to be sort of under the shadow of holiness. So next thing you know, an entire city has grown, and there are, I think it's Brian Daly, writes about this. There are hundreds of cities like this throughout the Middle East and Europe. And of course, America's South and West, or the Southwest, are all the great cities, have these religious names because they started as monasteries for the same reason. And even in the Protestant case, I'll say the Puritan case, in New England, for religious reasons, these settlements arose, and around that religious faith, civilization became possible. So Christianity plants the seed of civilization. If we go to someone like, well, I don't want to talk too much without letting you come back, but it's clear that's what happens.
I like that line that the hermit builds the city. And in some ways, that line kind of answers the whole big question.
Right. So St. Paul says, "For here we have no lasting city." So we seek for we seek the one which is to come. In Hebrews, I think it's 11 or 13, but then he says, "Let us therefore go forth to him outside the gates." And he describes the liturgical manner in which we will go to him outside the gates. And that liturgical manner generates a city. So the more we renounce the earthly city, the more we make it happen. And a genuinely Christian civilization would be peopled by lots of men and women doing precisely that, like renouncing an over-attachment to this world, living by the cross, and precisely in this way, making the world civilized for others. Now, then comes the freeloader problem. If people want to freeload off of that, then they'll milk that, they'll mine that value until it's gone. But if they rather are inspired to similarly live not for themselves, but for God and for Christ and for others, then that civilization will strengthen, despite us.
So you use the word liturgy as sort of like this big connecting point between the hermit and the city that comes about. And you talk about this quite a bit in your chapter. In what way does the liturgy provide sort of a blueprint for the city, which I think is a wonderful phrase, a blueprint for the what it means to be a city?
I'm a Christian first and foremost, but in terms of my intellectual work, I'm a disciple of the late Jane Jacobs, and I did know her the last 6 years of her life, and we exchanged letters. I was at her house 4 or 5 times. I visited with her when she was in Washington, D.C., where I was then living. So we had some kind of a relationship. And the relationship started when I noticed that her classic work about city order, called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, which there are more and more fans of Jane Jacobs. More and more people love her and realize that she was, the one. She really had it going on in terms of her understanding of city order and so many other things. And I noticed that she was describing cities as if they were literally a kind of liturgy. So what we mean by that is a work of the people, a place of radical openness to the unknown and to the other, a place where we cycle through death and rebirth and risk and reward, offering and sharing many, many times. That's how the city arises. A place too that's centered on a kind of Eucharistic insight, that that the person who develops their work, for her that was a very technical thing. It meant the person who perceives a kind of message or invitation in their work and accepts that invitation and develops their work further. That's a kind of Eucharist, which we do for the life of the world. So now, initially, of course, I thought that was amazing that in her, people know her for her phrase, the ballet of the city street. They love that. But what that really is the liturgy of the hours. And it's a liturgy in these other ways too. She took it much further. So that was my first letter to her. She writes back, she says, "You're the best interpreter of my work that I'm aware of. In a profound way, you're showing me what my own works mean." And I was like, whoa. Then she said, "I was surprised by how much you anticipated my most recent book and answered a question I had in it." So I ran out to the store, whatever. I bought the next book. I could not figure out what she was talking about. And after some weeks, some months, I realized that this liturgical character of cities, she thought, without calling it that, was present in nature as well, in complex systems, organically complex systems, in living systems. All living systems cycle through death and life. All living systems, kind of live liturgically and ritually. That's how they convert chaos into order. And so what that meant was she took the city liturgy hypothesis as being a kind of rough and ready reconciliation of science with religion. So that was not what I intended. And of course, once she said it, then I saw it too. Then I kind of pursued it and pursued that with her, and she kind of backed off because she was not, her method was, a radical skepticism. You have to, if you're going to reason inductively, you have to let the patterns insist on their presence.
Mm,
You can't go fishing.
mm. So you're sort of adapting her work and making it, I don't know, orthodox in a sense?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, what she said, and as our conversation continued, and I said, hey, what about this thing? Another book that you have looks just like, St. John's, revelation of, of the apocalypse, the book of Revelation. And she said, well, if something is true, it should show up in many places. So no, I don't think so. I've written an article called "A Gentle Reconciliation of Science with Religion," and about my letter to her and her letter back. And essentially, it's the idea. The idea is that if you're a Christian, you can now say that science has discovered the ubiquity of ritual in the cosmos. That's where all order comes from. If you're a scientist, you can say religion is one more instance of natural, emergent, organically complex order that's patterned in this way, both religion and its rituals.
Mm, mm,
So it's not, you're not forcing the religious conclusion on anyone. And Jane Jacobs wasn't forced to that either.
mm. Yeah, that's really good. In your chapter, you bring us to sort of like the liturgy of Holy Week, like you mentioned that quite a bit, and that was your dissertation too, right? So how does this liturgy, the liturgy of Holy Week, how does that sort of overlay your understanding of the city?
So one of the things that Jane Jacobs tried to do, and I talk about this in my book, there were about 5 or 6 people. I have them really in a footnote. I haven't even read them all myself, but 5 or 6 or 7 people in the 20th century that independently tried to recover the really classic and deep view of what civilized order is, and namely that any civilization requires 3 different modes of work, or 3 different modes of relating, 3 different also lists of social ethical commands, and the 3 are in conflict. And specifically 2 of them, what Jane Jacobs called the guardian, which is government work, and another one that she called the trader or commercial merchant work, are most in conflict. You need them both to survive. You need good government and you need reasonably productive economy. And they're constantly fighting, right? That's all our American politics, right? One side's like, more government's the answer. Others have less government, more commerce is the answer. So God created the world so we'd fight like that. He created it so that these things would be opposed. And then the classic view was that the third mode, what Jane Jacobs called the third force, or she also called it art or gift or love, has to affect a reconciliation of the other 2. It has to transfigure them. So Jane Jacobs called this the symbiosis of the syndromes of guardians and traders under the influence of the third force. And she doesn't have much to say about the third force because that's not really her thing. But what the ancients called symbiosis, living together, they thought living together is a sin. What you need is to get married. So they called it a wedding, and it's the wedding between the king and the people. And that goes back time out of mind, and it's everywhere. It's in the caste system of India. It's in Japan. It's in the Aztecs, as far as I know, the Mayans. It's just everywhere. There's no human civilization that can avoid the tripartite organization of society. So Jane Jacobs noticed this. This is what the Solzhenitsyn Harvard address is about. Although he was pilloried for everything he said, he was just saying that, but he didn't have the words to say it that we could understand. Priestland, the great Oxford historian, and his merchant, soldier, sage, or whatever the title is, he's talking about the same thing. There's a couple others. I've got Galbraith. I don't remember the names. And the first one, actually, in the 20th century, was a guy named Rudolf Steiner, and had this social threefolding, whatever. So everyone is trying to come back to this. And as I say humorously in the book, we conduct the social wedding, we Americans, as if it were a divorce proceeding. And every 4 years, the guardians accuse the traitors of betrayal and worthlessness, and vice versa. And then the people think they're both insane, but at some point they got to pick one or the other, and hopefully the balance holds over time.
Mm. So Jonah wanted to ask a question. I'm going to let Jonah ask a question related to beauty. What's cool about Jonah is he's been working through this book way longer than I have. And he's also been leading this book with some other men, diving deep into its concepts. So I'm going to let Jonah ask a question related to beauty.
Well, I guess before I do that, or maybe instead of that right now,
Yeah, sounds great.
I think it's great this marriage that's being described is so elegantly approached from countless angles, because there's kind of a dichotomy in this question you brought up, Kyle, about do we stay and fight for the city, or do we bag it and leave? And there's this, I think it's chapter 3. Let me read a really quick excerpt here. It says, the Enlightenment comes directly out of scholastic theology and the medieval notion that there is a nature that is all right on its own, to which grace is then added. That's totally heretical, just nuts. In Orthodoxy, we think that no existing thing would exist for even the tiniest moment were it not sustained by uncreated grace. So the worldview that maybe this city is this neutral thing, which it's kind of corrupted and it's kind of messy now, so let's leave and start another one, is in denial of the basic reality that all of creation is an icon of heavenly things. And if it has form, it's not totally forsaken. And I thought that and the reason why, I mean, it's so relevant that we're talking about the marriage of science and religion, because that's the same basic leap of taking an objectified bottom-up approach. Everything is just regolith, interacting, spawning more complex, interesting phenomenon, versus a top-down, we receive inspiration from principalities and angels. It's the wrong way to think about it, because Jane Jacobs talks about basically you can't understand a complex system without loving it. So you're subjectifying the objective in a sense. So I thought, Dr. Tim, is that an acceptable way to be thinking about this basic dichotomy of, the cities are corrupt, bag out, go to the countryside? It's like, no, there needs to be a marriage here, because where are you? And there's no healing apart from the soul's retracing from non-being to being through eros for Christ.
Yeah, this is November 2024 when we're having this conversation. Exactly a year ago, in early November of 2023, a friend sent me to Lastingham, in Yorkshire, near northeast of York, England, and I had the chance to go to the in Lastingham. There's a Church of St. Mary's, which is there's a special name for this church, but in the crypt is the probable tomb of Saint Cedd, C-E-D-D. So Saint Cedd was, celibate monastic bishop. The Celts, I think, missionized Northumbria, and he ruled. I mean, he was a bishop from this place. And when my cabbie was named Abby. She said, "I'm Abby the cabbie," and she had a great story about her son meeting Prince Charles and all that. But anyway, so as you're driving to Lastingham from wherever I was staying the night, you can't really see it. It's sort of like there's a little bit of woods, and it's just kind of down in a ravine almost. And you would think, and then just on the other side are the moors, which is, desert. Then that's the desert of the United Kingdom are the moors. What's worse than the desert? I got sick right away. I did the hike to St. Anne's Cross there, and I was instantly ill. So, so it was the holiest place ever, Saint said, and you leave with such a reverence for these Celtic mystics. These guys were Palamas 1,000 years before Palamas. They were so hesychastic, and just England is a holy land, right? If you go there, and that I have never been to Ireland, but I assume it's the same. Anyway, the point is this: at the Synod of Whitby in 676, something like that. I don't know. It was 576, somewhere in that era. I don't know my dates. I'm not a good historian. Saint Ced is at the council, and he signs off on the reorganization of the English Church. And guess what? The bishop is going to be in the city. Now, Saint Ced's thing was strategically cool, because if you want to see the bishop, you got to leave the city, leave the world, go off in the desert, go into this place, climb down the ravine, find the guy, and he's surrounded by his huge community. Everything's holiness. Everything's imageless prayer. And now, and ask your question of the bishop. You can't even remember what it was. It's like going to my confession to my spiritual father in Moscow. It's like I got one thing written down. The moment I enter the church, that's gone. Then I go to stand in line for confession, that's gone. And then I get to him, and it's a fourth thing totally different. So, strategically, tactically, that's how you'd want the bishops to be. But Saint Ced signed off. Okay, we're abolishing that system. We're going with the Roman system. The bishop's in the city. And that's just the way it is. We're not. Now, I think it's really hard, for bishops, right? Because in a way, they'd like to just be out in the desert. But the people have not only just chased them to the desert, they've kidnapped them, and they've hauled them back to die for the people on an hour-by-hour basis. But yeah, so for Jane Jacobs, city is, a city is to human beings what an anthill is to ants. That's our place. That's where we live. Now, the thing is, every earthly city lives to the extent that it participates in the heavenly city. And that's kind of the meaning of the hermit and so if you serve the earthly city too much, too hard, or if you're just working too hard, you want to get out of it because you want to remember that there's another city, another life, right? Just think of it. Makes no sense. I don't know how other American men think, but to me as an American man, why don't we only elect Green Berets and Navy SEALs to president? What are these other jokers doing? They're the ultimate men, but they are not interested. When they give it all, and they live in Montana at the end. They're not coming back to show us the way or something, right? They're and the same, with all kinds of people who, who was the guy that was I mentioned him in a footnote of the book, the original Rambo. He didn't go into some kind of leadership or something. They go quietly. They need a rest. They've served the earthly city so hard. Yeah, and lots of people feel that way, So that's the yin and the yang of it. Yeah.
So the liturgy of the liturgy of the countryside can't be separated from the liturgy of the city, and it's a false dichotomy in a certain sense. As civilization is what happens when people interact and worship at various scales. Would that be a way to put it?
So, You know, a civilization in a way is it's a kind of memory bank of all the ways that people from the city that created that civilization, all the insights they had about how to survive in the world and how to flourish with each other. And if the mother city dies, you know, its offspring in the world are kind of become nomads. This was Jane Jacobs' theory about, you know, where nomadic peoples come from. That they were agricultural people spun off from some city, and the mother city was lost. And Christians, you know, often feel that way. And I think that's the Epistle to Diognetus and, you know, an early patristic writing. Christians, you know, are like these orphans in the world. They are not in their true place. But as I said, the more they accept that, the more civilization and new cities rise around them. That's just a paradox. You're just kind of stuck, right? If Rod Dreher's right, and we ought to, whatever the term is, the Benedict option, right? Everyone's going to want to live there. It's just going to be the new city. And it's the same, you know, right now in Arizona with Elder Ephraim. He was a powerful and profound saint. And in the middle of a total desert of nothingness, water was magically discovered. I mean, it was just completely miraculous. And everybody wants to live there. And it's always the same. Like, you want to be around a monastic when push comes to shove. But that just means that will become a city. You can't kind of avoid it. The only way to avoid it, the only way to have a real Benedict option and actually stay, you know, separate. Of course, he doesn't mean that. I don't want to, you know, but is what in Greek we call avaton. You have to bar one or the other of the genders, because otherwise the fractal wedding, you know, it just takes place at every scale, right? If Mount Athos let women on Mount Athos, then in 6 weeks it'd be a Toys R Us up there, right? It's just people would want to live in the shadow of the holy mountain. And so that's why, you know, of course, it's the same, for example, at Ormelia. Last night I was at their little store here in Athens. You know, large sections of that complex are wholly off limits to men, always, ever, right? That's how you keep it from becoming, you know, too much of a city generator. I don't know if I answered the question. I think I lost the thread. I lost the thread.
No, it's totally beautiful. Yeah, you completely addressed it, because it's reframing the question, right? It's just making it a structure of reality that where people are holy, that's where cities happen.
Right. If everyone in the city is corrupt, right? It's like Jane Jacobs talks about a neighborhood that's in Death and Life that's plagued by crime, and no one there knows anyone in City Hall. No one in that neighborhood knows anyone. You call the police, they don't come. And she says, that neighborhood is not a learning neighborhood. Nobody learns anything except, and I think she's this blunt, she says, to get the hell out. Right. So when there's no longer people willing to live self-sacrificially, the city becomes a desert. It doesn't matter how wealthy it is, how fine the buildings, how anything. It becomes a desert. And it's cities at that point are like radioactive. There's some amount of half-life. As people get out, they've got to get away. City Hall is corrupt, the corporations are corrupt, the police are corrupt, and you just get out.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of friends who live in San Francisco, and they've gotten out. And I think one theme of this conversation is, as a father, I have 7 kids, and we wrestle with this idea. And I don't live in the city, but like a big city, but you know, you wrestle with this idea. Particularly many people my age, do we live the city? Do we go to the countryside? Do we create something new? Do we find the holy guy? And so there's this tension, but we also have to have jobs. And so there's this tension about what we are supposed to do, and to the extent to what, you know, how much are the cities in America, how much have they become corrupted? Because you talk about it on page 703, that from like the 40s to like the 1980s, like American urban planners were building anti-cities. And I want to learn a little bit more what you mean by that. They were building anti-cities, because I feel like we're like living in the fruit of that, or the decay of that. What do you mean by anti-cities? And then how has this led to the situation that we're in today?
Yeah, so from 1949 until 1974, for 25 years, there was a federal act. I don't remember the official title, but people think of it as sort of the Urban Renewal Act, or maybe it was the Federal Housing, whatever it was called. Then that kind of governed this great attempt to cleanse, this Puritan cleansing of the city, of the slum. And that was, supposedly, if we were only committed enough and willing to spend enough money, we could erase blight. So Jane Jacobs, comes on the scene, as this is underway. And every American should read The Death and Life of Great American Cities. I mean, it's not a religious book by any means, it's just a holy book. And, she's saying that, so she's a sort of a junior editor, something like that, at Architectural Forum. And she's the low woman on the totem pole, and they're like, hey, we don't want to cover this, these housing projects, and you do it. So she's covering it all over the country, and she's just like, hey, this emperor has no clothes. And one of her, two of her classic phrases in the book is, this is not the rebuilding of cities, it's the sack of cities. American cities are being sacked. And then she says, this is not their rebuilding, she says elsewhere, it is their witless murder. So one of the reasons you want to read this book is to understand race relations in the United States, because before 1900, 1905, whatever it was, 98% of African Americans lived in the former Confederate States. And then, a term most Americans seem never to have heard of, the Great Migration occurred. And all of a sudden, massive numbers of African Americans migrated, in episodic clusters to the northern and western cities for jobs, where they were met, with terrible racism and blocked at every turn, from access to banking, access to jobs, access to housing. So, nevertheless, being on the margins of a city seemed to them to be better than, living in a completely urbanless realm. And in this, they're just like every other red-blooded human being on this earth. You got to get to the city. So they did. And they built, something of an order just by virtue of their incredible strength of character and strength of spirit and everything else. But in particular, because they had no access to banking, the areas they lived, looked pretty rundown. They could not, get normal mortgage loans. And so, very smart people with, lots of, quote unquote, love in their hearts decided that the answer to this was to extirpate, these African American neighborhoods, through urban renewal, which blacks called Negro removal. And so there was something like 2,000 American neighborhoods in 300 cities that were dynamited to the ground, and their populations just pushed and shoved randomly around those cities, so that we could build, these renewed cities. And of those 2,000, obliterated, nuclear bombed, neighborhoods, something like 1,600 were African American. So, as I say somewhere in the book, I mean, that which is not assumed is not healed. That's a kind of a Christological saying. But I think, this is a wound on the African American nation, to the extent that, we can think of it that way, that's never even discussed. Anyway, what's my point of all this? So we thought that we were going to, make these gleaming cities, but the liturgy was in place. African Americans were working, starting businesses. They were reinventing American culture. They were doing lots of beautiful things. All they needed was ready access to the sacrificial object, capital, in small doses. And that could never be found somehow. What was found is massive sums spent by labor unions and big corporations, white labor unions, white corporations, white do-gooders behind all this to obliterate their neighborhoods and sow them to the winds. So this idea of the city as liturgy has very practical significance, right? The city is the work of the people. So what's preventing that work from happening? And usually it's usually in most countries of the world, it's access to capital, access to property, land, and those are the two things that have to be addressed. Everything else about helping the poor is pretty much, just to make you feel good, right?
Jonah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. What was the question that led to this?
Well,
Forget me.
It was connecting the idea of like we've made anti-cities that are also beautiful in a way, and
Okay.
anti-liturgical.
Right.
And we're
Right.
we're getting there, but we could go. Yeah, I feel like there's
So
more there going on with the anti-beautiful aspect as well, which is all about your book, Beauty First approach.
Okay, so the city is liturgy in multiple ways. One is this liturgy of the hours. That's what Jane Jacobs called the ballet of the city street. That a city neighborhood is not like someplace in the suburbs of the country. To be safe, to be healthy, to be alive, to be prosperous, to be functional, to be civilized, a city neighborhood has to bring in different people at all hours of the day, almost a 24-hour cycle, but should be close to 24, 22, 23, 20 minimum. And that means that neighborhood has to have places to residence. It also has places to shop and entertain, and it has to have places to work. So all the hours of the day. So that's what those African-American neighborhoods had before. Afterwards, they were exclusively residence, towers in a park, and utterly unsafe. Okay, so that's the first liturgy. The second liturgy is the Eucharist, that the city is a Eucharist in the sense that lots of people are sort of spying the Logos and bringing it into flesh for the life of the world. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people have to do that. And then a third way in which, city is liturgy is just that it's this great work of the people, that everyone has got to be getting involved, right, on the problems that matter, right? And everyone's got to be pitching in. And monopolies in particular are really dicey in cities. And of course, the big monopolies in cities are teachers' unions and public transportation. And those things have been city killers. And because they're anti-liturgical. Now, when I say we've been building anti-cities in all those ways, because we never addressed the banking problem, but especially that we obliterated these kind of walkable, diverse in time neighborhoods in favor of these single-use zoning. And the city was sorted out like a phone book or something. Here's all the work, here's all the residents, here's all the entertainment. Oh, an entertainment district. It's all, just so, the American city just feels so craptacular, right? Like it's like glitzy, it's this and that, and it's all fake. But there's plenty of police around to make sure that you can have the feeling of being in the city as you're walking to and from the Boston Garden, at 3 a.m. or whatever, or, leaving a show at 1 a.m. or something. It's like, what is this? It's completely fake. And what's fake is not sustainable, right? It's bankrupt.
This might be a great time to kind of overview what is beauty first, because Dr. Tim, you are like answering these questions like they are living and they're alive to be participated with, not a dead thing that we're supposed to get the right phylogeny and taxonomy correct, and then we can really understand the problem very well, and then we'll come up with the right people to implement the right solution. We're talking about life. and the path of healing versus the path of identifying the proper problem so we can then admire it and then spend money on it. Can you give us a summary of what is beauty first? A lot of the listeners might not quite understand that idea.
So in the case of Jane Jacobs, what beauty first means is that, first you fall in love with something like the city, and in your love for it inspires your investigation of it. They're never sort of, your loving and your knowing are never really separate. And in her case, beauty first really means reasoning inductively. Like, she came to the city when she was, I get it wrong. I don't know if she was 22 or what she was, but fairly young. I guess it might have been 26. I mean, that was 1932, and she was born in 1916. So what is that up to? 18? What is that? 4 years before she turned? So no, I think she was 1935. She came. It's 34, whatever. Anyway, at a certain point she came, and she lived in New York City for all these years. And she fell in love with that space. And she had a marvelous eye for its intricate order. And so in this spirit of wonder, she pursued her intellectual, thought. As she says in The Death and Life of Great American Cities, the people who prescribed for the cities in such a disastrous way all hated cities. And so, this person just described the street as a human sewer. This person, thought it was this. This person thought it was that. All these people who were prescribing for cities and were responsible for their witless murder, they hated cities. And they hated the messiness of it. To them, it was solidified chaos. She was a kind of innate complexity theorist. She could see in the so-called chaos a marvelous order, an innate order, and she was curious about that order. So in that sense, her method is like the old trivium. First, you study the grammar of a thing, and you can't learn any language unless you kind of are tickled by its grammatical absurdities, right? Like, there's no foreign language you're going to learn if you aren't sort of pleased and amused by the certain weird tricks that it does with its grammar, and like, this is like that, but that's like that. If you just go, it makes no sense, who cares? But if that oddness, that idiosyncrasy, is delightful to you, you're going to learn that language.
Yeah.
So that's the grammar, and then she found the logic within the grammar. And when she thought she had the logic, she went back to the grammar. She tried to find counterexamples. And as she says, only when I couldn't refute a pattern did I settle on it. And if you pursue grammar and logic enough, and you're able to describe to others in a way and bear their feedback, so that's the rhetoric stage, you're at truth. Now, some people look at my writings and they say, okay, beauty first. Are you saying that truth doesn't matter? The issue is much more like this. I don't believe in evolution per se, like a godless thing, but I do believe that life has been around for 2 billion years or whatever it is, and that there's been living things making their living and surviving and propagating for 2 billion years. All those living things had to react to their environment. They had to react to information, to process information and react. They didn't have brains. So how did they understand the truth of things? Through aesthesis, through feeling, through sensation, through basic chemical pathways. So there's 2 billion years of truth knowing in you. You don't go to school to erase that in favor of what happened, 300,000 years ago or whatever, however long Homo sapiens has been around. You don't go to just think only with your prefrontal cortex and everything else doesn't matter. Your whole being has an apparatus for knowing, right? You go in, you just know a situation is healthy, unhealthy. You don't want to silence that. So you have more apparatus for rationality than just your discursive, analytical intellect, or your deductive reasoning.
That's beautiful. It's kind of distinguishing facts from truth, and truth is participative. Can I read a short excerpt from chapter 2, I think, about like that talks about that? So, the way of orthodoxy, the way of right glory, is to begin by giving glory to God's theophany, the beautiful, and then to practice the good glimpsed within that theophany. Through this eros, which unfolds into agape, we participate in the true. Thus we become true, even the Ten Commandments. Thus we become true, even the Ten Commandments were received within a glorious. Sorry, my period messed up. Thus we become true. Even the Ten Commandments were received within a glorious theophany, a mountaintop vision and loving encounter between God and Moses. So you say that which does not stir the soul in dynamic movement toward its telos cannot heal the soul. So it's not the denial of truth, right? It's elevating truth as something we participate in through our senses and through our eros for that which is most true, which is Christ. Is that reasonable to say it that way?
Well, we are, just, poor forked creatures, as Lincoln said, and we are not, computers, and we know as human beings in a particular sequence, and that sequence is grammar, logic, rhetoric, or as Ian McGilchrist is now saying, proving that every brain which we can study in all of biology and going back 400 million years in the fossil record was bicameral. And so the way of knowing has always been the whole handed off to the part, back to the whole. That's beauty, goodness, truth, right? A beauty first is just saying, I'm not saying anything really different than what Ian McGilchrist is saying. I'm not saying anything different than the trivium. This is the way. The kid is coming with me, to quote, what is that? The Mandalorian. This is the way. And so now, the Pharisees, they didn't like that. They came to Christ and they said, okay, you did this theophany, that theophany. I know everyone could see that, you healed the blind, you've done everything. But let's talk about, let's do this in a little more truth first way. And Christ always had an answer. He didn't just say, shut up or something. He didn't just blind him or something, zap him. We have to have a reasonable, respect for, for the opinions of mankind, in the words of the Declaration of Independence. People, can think in a what I call a truth first way, but really is kind of more of a goodness first way. But they can do that, and we should have some kind of an answer. However, if you want to live a normal human life, you are, in the words of the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, going to have to resolve to resign from the debating society and give faith a chance. And faith means that, this theophany, I have to accept what my eyes can see. This is the Son of God. This is the truth here. He died on the cross. And let's just accept it in faith and do what he says, and see how that doesn't lead to the recalibration of our mind.
Beautiful.
I mean, we can debate forever, but eventually,
Yeah, this whole beauty first approach, you give all sorts of examples throughout the book. I think I connected with a couple pretty quickly. One is you talking about working with trauma victims, and how our modern society has sort of these machine-like solutions of using psychoanalysis and all that. I worked with some like kids who were traumatized for several years, and I noticed that, yeah, do they need to have a therapist? Yes. Do they need to have certain types of treatments? Yes. But I noticed that there was like this huge piece that was missing. And that was these kids were, it felt like they were just being re-traumatized and made to talk about trauma, and they were missing an enchanted worldview. And so I oftentimes went hiking with them, and we built bridges across the creek, and we did things that inspired them to not only give, like build a bridge, build a hiking trail, go out, go on hikes, see animals. I noticed this change in the kids, and people couldn't, the therapists and other people, they couldn't quite understand what was happening. And I was just like, look, this is so, how is this not obvious? They're traumatized, and you're just giving them more trauma. That was like this understanding that the understanding of beauty and enchantment was just missing from this.
Yeah. I mean, trauma is a big deal, and of course, it's not the same in every life. And my guy on the trauma thing is still Jonathan Shea, to a lesser extent, Bessel van der Kolk. Those are my lights. And Jonathan Shea in Achilles in Vietnam, answers the question, can trauma be healed? And he says yes, and then he explains why, and then he says no, and then he explains why, and then he says maybe, and he explains why. So trauma is a thing, and it's to the extent that anyone can be healed of anything. Let me put it this way. We need to think of mental health. Mental health is more like learning to lift weights or lifting weights regularly or going to Pilates regularly than it is like listening to a great lecture from a professor, right? It's more like mental health is something that we become the custodians of for ourselves and others by doing the work. And, if you're an alcoholic, that work might be a 12-step meeting. If you're someone who's not an alcoholic, that might be your morning prayers, your evening prayers, confession. Pilgrimage is huge. Pilgrimage at all fractal scales, the pilgrimage of the morning prayer, the pilgrimage of reading the life of a saint, the pilgrimage of going to church on Sunday. All those journeys to the center, of whatever kind. And it's a lot more like martial arts, I would say, mental health. It's like learning how to fight and win. And part of learning how to fight, especially if you're like studying judo, is learning how to fall. And I remember I had a martial arts instructor who, just put so much emphasis on that and like learning how to fall well. And one of the great moments of my 20s was he was trying to demonstrate something with me, using me as like, his partner. And I kind of reacted like way too tensely. So he set everyone off to practice the thing. And then he said, okay, look, there's something going on here. He's like, get ready, I'm going to throw you. And he just threw me 9 times in a row. And it wasn't like someone else throwing me, like one of my partners, and we throw each other. This was the guy, the 3rd-degree black belt guy. I was flying through the air. I couldn't tell what was up or down. I mean, he had me so going, but every time I landed safely and as he had trained me. Every single time, I didn't miss one. Again. And I was, I think, permanently different person because the lesson was learned. He had taught me how to fall. We don't do that. We don't teach people spiritually how to fall. We just go like, oh, damn, you fell again. Sucks to be you. Try harder next time. So we're not approaching mental health or emotional health the right way. And so a trauma kid, when they're a kid, this is another story, right? Like what you were doing the right thing, beauty, love, commitment, accompanying. Eventually, though, a person has to grow up, take responsibility for their own reactions, and start to accompany themselves. And some and it's a lifetime thing. You're never over it. Trauma is a kick in the head by a donkey. That it's not easy. Yeah.
I think that image of trauma as excommunication you talk about in the book several places is so boy, I don't know, I want to say beautiful. It's just so true that it hurts to see that. And I see that in our family interactions or friend interactions, to recognize when there's excommunication happening or self-excommunication happening in a liturgical ontology. Excommunication is death. I really appreciate you talking about trauma as excommunication in that, because it's really opened my eyes up to daily examples of where healing is needed and what healing looks like.
Yeah. I think in a personal life, let's say a person suffering from trauma and they've experienced an excommunication, and now, I mean, that's the beauty of trauma. I mean, the hell of it is that, going forward, you now are the agent of your traumatizer. What they started, you continue for them, without end. Now, is that death? It's a taste of death.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bitter taste. But God understands, and he sees what we're doing and why we're doing, and when it's when we've just had too much, and that this is the best we can do. And I mean, one of the incredible things, you go to the Holy Mountain, as I was, this year, a week ago, and when you come to the holy place and the holy person, that all sort of goes away, and that's why it's. I wouldn't be so crazy to say you ought to try to become a saint, but we ought to pray that the Lord will send forth workers into the harvest, and specifically those kind of workers, that the Lord sends more truly holy people, because nothing can really withstand them. I mean, they just, you can have so many barriers, but when you meet a holy person, it just melts away, and it's the most wonderful thing. And yeah.
Mm.
And they're usually funny, these guys too. One of the elders told me a story a long time ago about someone who said, Father, I've come to the Holy Mountain to take my own life. And he's like, and if you knew why, he says, you'd agree with me. And the elder said, I probably would. Tell me why. And the guy said it, and then the elder had sort of an answer. I mean, he just, a saint is like, trauma is like you're on a horse, you can't fall off. The thing is got stung by a big old dragonfly or whatever, it's going crazy, it's painful as can be, it's running, you can't get off, you can't stop it. And what a saint or a saintly person, or just a calm person, just like Kyle did, will do is they ride their horse right alongside you, stride for stride, and they slow that thing down a little bit at a time. There's it's just the car is out of control, and they manage to get in there right along with you and put on the brake slowly. And it's a thing.
Mm.
It's a thing. It's a high art, and it's the highest art, and it's in my mind.
It's really the way you talk about this in the Ethics of Beauty really convicted me of how much work I've got to do as a friend, right? That to be able to be a friend who doesn't objectify my friend's difficulty, but comes up alongside in the horse, not only has the courage to, but the self-awareness and right spirit to be able to ride alongside your friend when his horse is going buck nutty. Yeah, that high art, that's a good word for that.
So I was thinking about this to connect the dots as we wrap up here. Are our cities traumatized? We don't have to wrap up. We can keep going. We can do some question and answers too. But are our cities traumatized? Is that why are we running from trauma, or what sort of healing are they in need of?
Oh, like the city as kind of as a whole. Yeah, Jane Jacobs described, the cruelly shaken up city. She has a passage somewhere. She says, real people are different than statistical people. Statistical people are infinitely interchangeable. Whereas real people invest years of their lives in specific relationships, and when torn from those relationships, cease to function as humans, sometimes temporarily, sometimes forever. I mean, it's a holy book that she wrote. I mean, she was a holy person, and I mean that in the sense of someone, with an unblinking eye towards injustice and towards human suffering, and an ability to love and empathize and tell it like it is. She was really, really something. So our city's traumatized. Yeah, our cities are dying, I think, in the United States. And I think that Jane Jacobs thought they were, at least, and that the death, it also comes from, the massive amounts of city earnings that get diverted to welfare schemes and corporate welfare schemes and endless military spending. And maybe even if that spending is necessary, it's still it's kind of like a leech on the city, and it's but there's a lot of hope, and there's just a lot of, I don't know. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I've been thinking, like, what would it mean for us to grow in our appreciation of the city instead of just flee it, which I think sometimes our instinct to do this as fathers. Um, what would it look like if I'm thinking about orthodoxy and missions being started and monasteries being started. What would it look like if there were more monasteries, Orthodox monasteries in cities? What kind of role would they play in helping our traumatized cities heal?
So there was a time in church history in the 300s, and from really Constantine forward, which did not last long, about 120 years, at least in the East, when the monastics were, great social action people, and they invented the hospital and the orphanage and the old folks home, and they just tore it up. I mean, they did it all. And at the Fourth Ecumenical Council, the decision was made, by the Universal Church, that the monks ought to go back into their monasteries and pray, and that was their thing. And the work that they had developed, I mean, I'm talking in a Jane Jacobs terms, the things that they had invented and perfected were, in some cases, the monks still, ran hospitals, but a lot of that work was handed over to the state, or expected to be patronized by the rich, and lay workers came in. I don't know if that was, the right decision. That was certainly a decision of a Fourth Ecumenical Council, so I'm not going to question it. I think that, if you ask yourself, what's wrong with any city, right? Or what's wrong with the world? Well, why is anything wrong? It's fine. That's fine. Okay, here we are. Now, if we can become beauty first people and practice gratitude, and out of that gratitude, gain the courage to share and the courage to do our jobs. Even if, and I want to say something about that courage in a second, then it becomes paradise wherever we are. So it's not the question we need different policies or programs or this and that. The individual Christian needs to rededicate themselves, right, to, if it's a Protestant Christian listening to this, have a lot of faith in your 30-minute Bible study with the notebook and the coffee in the morning. Go for it. If you're a Roman Catholic listening to this, I have a lot of faith in the daily Mass. Do it. and if you're Orthodox, whatever, 10 minutes a day of Jesus prayer, whatever it is, your morning prayers, your evening prayers, put that theophany first, that encounter with theophany, and practice the gratitude that helps you to become a person of peace and generosity, and that should radiate, around you. The more you go getting involved in politics, as I've been lately, the more you hurt people's feelings, the more you isolate things, and it becomes difficult to create a Christian civilization in those terms. It's not a political act in that sense, right? And although some people are called to do that, they are, and if you are, more power to you. But I think it's this thing. Look, what is Orthodox Christian spirituality? It means to be like Christ in the Holy Spirit. In other words, Christ is the Christ. He's the anointed one. So not only do we become more like him and assimilated to his life, but in a way that only he ever did, we become able to stably, in a stability, receive an anointing by the Holy Spirit. That's why he's the Christ. Only he can receive that. Why? Because the Holy Spirit, when it anoints you, makes you both a sacrificial lamb and a sovereign, a king or a queen, together. And this is unbearable, except in Christ. So to live those two things, and there's two particular stances, two particular kind of sayings that summarize Orthodox spirituality. One is, all these will be saved, only I shall be lost. And that in particular is for men or for people in positions of guardians. And the other is, I don't know anything that I might know someone. It's the unknowing of things and characteristics and objects to know persons. And those two sayings are combined in the Jesus prayer, because you unknow everything except Christ, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. You put out all images and thoughts. You know him. Have mercy on me, the sinner, by which you mean the sinner, Christ, who became sin on the cross. So you unite those two stances, and that is Orthodox spirituality, if you can do that stably. And then whatever your profession is, live that out, and paradise will form around you. And if a lot of people do that, you do get emergent effects.
The recipe is simple: know Christ. Yeah.
Yes. In AA, they're so smart. They have that saying, know God, N-O God, N-O, no peace. And then K-N-O-W, no God, no peace.
Mm-hmm.
This is true.
So Jonah, you've been going through this book with other people. What were some of the hard questions that people were asking of the book? Maybe some critical feedback that you've been wrestling with, that maybe you want to throw at Dr. Tim today. I know you mentioned a few of them to me, but it'd be fun to kind of talk about them a little bit.
Well, honestly, the hard questions in the book, if you hold them lightly and keep reading and experience the ideas in them, kind of seem to unfold into their own answer in a certain way. I hear people wrestle with, hey, what's the matter with therapy? I've benefited from therapy. Okay, keep reading. Hey, what's the matter with truth? Christ said, I'm the truth. He didn't say I am beauty. And Dr. Tim talked about that this afternoon, I believe. I can't pose any contrary ideas or arguments to Dr. Tim, because it is what Dr. Tim is articulating in the Ethics of Beauty is a completely coherent and cohesive worldview. Bishop Maxime in California, the Serbian bishop, he said that orthodoxy is a theory of everything. And Dr. Tim explains that, just how it's a theory of everything. And it's not just that, it's truth. Everyone says so. So I know I can't pose contrary ideas to Dr. Tim.
Well, I set you up for that. So I have a question. That is, I was thinking about this whole idea of cities, and let me take the echo off. There's a lot of language in scripture about like loving Jerusalem. And we talked about how like you can't really, renew a city or be a part of a city unless you love the city, that kind of third science. Um, and then I also think of like the love of New Rome, Constantinople, and Rome. I think the role that these cities have played in our own faith and our own tradition. It makes me wonder uh, how to connect the dots there with your book, City as Liturgy, with the love that we see of the city of Jerusalem.
So probably, the love for Jerusalem, is an image of God's love for the church, the New Jerusalem, and certainly, I think, we see this at the seminary that a student comes and they love Christ, almost invariably, and but by the end, we can say they also love the church, and it is an unfolding of that love for Christ, and then they desire to take care of her and to protect her, and this is when you're ready for ordination, right? It's not like, oh, am I virtuous this or virtuous that, although some level of virtue is a minimum, but it's really, have you taken on that ethos and that understanding of the church? In terms of loving our individual cities, I think on this earth, I think we talk about this is before there was an income tax in the United States. The wealthy sort of competed with the wealthy in other cities to be the benefactors in their cities. Kansas City has an orchestra. Dallas ought to have one. These guys have a great hospital. We need one. They have a university. We ought to have it. And you can think of that as partly selfish, and I think it's a kind of good selfishness, right? Like you don't, like, smart people know. Like, one of the reasons that Harvard has the biggest endowment is because they have the smartest graduates. I mean, among, and smart people are smart enough to realize you don't saw off the branch you're sitting on. You don't graduate from a college and go talk bad about it. That doesn't make you look good. You're the fool who went to that bad school. But people of lesser perspicacity, less acuity, do run down their mothers. They do talk bad about their parents. They do talk bad about their hometowns and their schools and their countries. And I got to tell you, it doesn't make you look any better. It's just not. There's no percentage in it. So what you want to do is you want to say, well, I go to Princeton, and let's say I go to Georgetown or something, and we have an endowment of $400 million or something when I was a student there. It's chump change. So if you are a Georgetown grad and you hit it big, you want to slide those poker chips over to the dealer, and that's kind of how people should feel about their cities to a large extent. If you're from Ohio, have a little respect and pay it back, and talk it up, and and try to invest in it. And part of this idea, I know that a time can come in your children's life, your wife's life, your life, you might want to live in a different place. It's fine. You're the father of the family. You got to make that call, and forget about what anyone else says, and forget about some theory. You'll know when it's time, if it's time. But the notion that you can take the money and run is an utter fantasy. Where are you going to go when it all collapses? Jane Jacobs says, cities invent and reinvent the rural world. And nobody nobody who wants to get out of the city wants to get so far that they can't access a city hospital and the city internet and all those city technologies. So everyone's living off the city anyway. So I think, it's be important for people to reinvest in their places in a self-sacrificial way. Now, that's hard when, the reigning religion, of woke really is neo-Marxism, and Marxism really is a doctrine of war. It's just sort of seeing, that society is a war of all against all, and, the owners of capital, the owners of the means of production, always have the upper hand in that war, and eventually we're going to get them. Well, you're not going to get them. That's all madness. Marx was many things. He was he was a very good sociologist, I would say, and in some sense the father of sociology, but he was not an economist. He has very little to tell us about how to renew our societies. And as wokeism and neo-Marxism have come in, all we've really seen is just more anger to no end, to no positive purpose, right? Right. And it'll be the same with reparations. We've been through so many rounds of reparations, starting with the Civil War, starting with, various things. Urban renewal was supposed to be a reparation. The welfare state was supposed to be a reparation. Every round of reparations has inflicted fresh traumas on the African American population. I think Christ is the answer in some deeper way. And I think the city as liturgy is the answer in a deeper way. People just need property and access to capital in a pretty much, I think, in Switzerland, there's no minimum wage. I think we should take a 10-year pause in immigration, abolish the minimum wage, and let people find gainful employment absent the welfare state, something like that. And that sounds super conservative, but people have got to get back to work, of all races, of all colors. The labor force participation is so low. This is anti-liturgy. People have got to get back to work. In a market that isn't flooded. In the 19th century, the unions were so against this untrammeled immigration because they knew it was driving down the price of labor. And I'm glad they didn't succeed because my ancestors came in, but it's hard for people at the bottom. Anyway,
the question of reform, there's it makes me think of Saint Pope Kyrillos VI, who the Coptic Church in Egypt was a complete mess in the first part of the 20th century, and it was the simony and a bunch of problems institutionally. And so you'd think, okay, well, we need to get a better person in there with some better ideas and institute some better policies. He was drugged from his cave, brought to the city, and he basically went silent, and people around him, he was holy, and that holiness caused people to fast and caused people to pray. And it's like there's an Orthodox vision of reform, which is something like the only healer is Christ, and apparently we're all on the way. So even me as the leader, I need to get out of the way. And so I need to repent, and only then through God's energies can work through me and heal us. And that he, through his ascetical reform, God healed the Coptic Church through from a lot of issues. Dr. Tim, can you think of other modern examples happening where you've seen a beauty first reform of cities or other bureaucracies?
yeah, and I don't know if that my prescriptions. I mean, they probably were right in 1960. I don't know that they're right for today. The issue then really was, well, okay, I'm going to take the question in the spirit you gave it, not get into too much policy. I think I just saw on Twitter today, somebody said, I interviewed a bunch of people who had real community in their neighborhoods, and I asked them, how'd you do it? And they all said the same thing, which was, we just started throwing parties. Right? That's liturgy 101 right there. Like, just have more parties. You know, I mean, invite people to your home, right? And just ask yourself, like, that is the thing. You just, whether it's a bus, whether it's a party, maybe you don't want them in your house, so you have it in the picnic, in the backyard in the summer, whatever. Now, if you put me in charge tomorrow of Nowheresville, Pennsylvania, I'd say, look, we're offering $1 million prize, $1 million in prizes spread out over 12 folk festivals. And every month, this month, we're going to host the international, Ukrainian folk dance off, and the winner gets 100 grand. And next week, it's square dancing, and I would just do a cash money and all of a sudden, everyone wants to come to my Nowheresville place to get their piece of the 100,000. Every home that can be an Airbnb is. You start going after these absentee landlords who've let their homes fall below code. Hey, fix it or sell. And you start to get things back into the liturgy. I think if there was a cheap and dirty way. Now, in Greece, the cheap and dirty way is you do try to get a monastery nearby, or if you're lucky, a crying icon. That really will boost the economy, because everyone's going to come and they're generous. Liturgies really do. I think it was always the case, by the way. I mean, this Göbekli Tepe, which is this place in kind of northern Asia Minor, sort of northern Cappadocia. What is it, 1,000 years older than Çatalhöyük, which is Jane Jacobs, sort of dream city, the oldest city yet discovered at that time. And I think these cultic centers preceded cities, and people figured out that it was a safe place to trade. And that's still true today in Greece. And if you go, if the parish down the street has their feast day, especially if it's in the summer, a week ahead of time, the streets are taken over by vendors. And those vendors are mostly undocumented people. And so that liturgy is incorporating them in a way that nothing else can into commerce and trade in some kind of way. They got to make a living. Even monks got to make a living. I mean, you need those things. I don't know if there's any other kind of cheap and dirty solutions, but I would definitely go for more festivals. Like, why not one every weekend? And you just become, the capital of course, until someone else does it, and then you got to think of something else. But at that point, you can think of something.
That's beautiful. We started a farm store here, and my wife is really good at connecting like local organic farmers to food. We live in a very small town, about 1,800 people, and it's just beautiful. It's palpable to feel the vivacity that people are just jazzed. I don't want to diminish it by saying for something, but kind of to your point, there's life here. There's life is being brought, and turns out life has power, and it's gorgeous to see that exponentially just inspire and grow and persist. Yeah, thanks for that. Having more parties. I'm gonna remember that one.
Yeah, I'm more of an introvert. I'm not going to lead that kind of a change, but there's plenty of extroverts out there, listening to these kind of things, and they need to step up and help us.
Yeah. Amen.
Somebody in the chat said communities used to be built around churches and Christian communities of old, but nowadays the liturgy is not the focus. People care more about the economy. What do you think about that, Dr. Tim?
People are stressed. People are stressed, and I think, but what you find, it's like, not investing in exercise. in the near term, well, you have lots of free time. You can get more stuff done. And then in the midterm, you feel kind of off. In the long term, you're too sick to do anything. And it's the same with going to church. In the near term, oh my God, I'll freed up my golf game. The kids can play soccer on Sunday morning. It's all nonsense. And no, I think in the near term, it is, there is a kind of reward. But in the but by the time you get to the long term, you realize our society doesn't have any center anymore. It's all just kind of nothing. And so, people just have to grow up and find a church that works for them and recommit and, get themselves in the car and go down there on a Sunday and make it happen. Religion is a social good in many ways, and you're not just going for yourself, but you're going to be the life, as Jonah just said, for everyone else, and to get them jazzed about this thing called civilization, and to remind ourselves, basically, one way we can put this whole conversation, the ancients knew that civilization was a miracle and a gift. We're so addled, as Jane Jacobs likes to say, that we think, you can, it's like comes in a can, like, ravioli or something, or just add water to your powdered orange juice tang or something. It's not like that. Civilization is a miracle and a gift. And without that awareness, you can't be civilized.
There's no causes of poverty, like you point out.
Yes. So just as wealth is, a miracle and a gift. And so we've got to be thankful, and, we've got to give back, but we've got to keep, praying for that, those miracles. Yeah. Mm. We were, here in Greece, they have these, a lot of churches have these candles that are like 4 foot high or 3 foot high. I call them the Iwo Jimas. You're not just, you're planting the flag, on Mount Suribachi with that thing. It's so great to, like, you have a request from God, go with a €5 Iwo Jima candle. You gotta remind yourself, what is happening. What is all this? What's all this like? What's all this like escapism and like you hide in your hole? You're not going to hide. If civilization goes down, there's no hiding. One family escaped the Soviet Union. This family of father and husband, wife and daughter that was in remote Siberia. No one knew where they were for 80 years. That was it. No one else escaped. There's no getting out of it. So instead of being so glum about it, why not enjoy it? Why not throw a party and enjoy your neighbors and enjoy their different perspective and try to build the city? They're not so bad.
So pray in the morning, become holy, and have a party is a big thing we've said today. Is it?
In the words of Miracle Max, it would take a miracle, right? We have challenges. God permits these challenges for our salvation. There are challenges in our cities. It's just that, in the name of I don't know what, we've permitted our cities to become so dangerous for so many people, and it's the poor who suffer most. The rich can get out first, and they can get out farthest. So you're not making anything better by, like, leaving some person who's what do we call it, robbing every store go free. That's not a blow for social justice. That's a blow against social justice. Mm-hmm. It's, what do people want? They want some utopia, but that utopia, is not a thing,
Mm. What is the role of coffee hour in our 6 hour, 4 or 5, 6 hours at church on Sunday mornings? How does that help renew?
Oh, I wanted to tell a coffee hour story. Thank you for bringing that up. So I asked a Navy chaplain once. I said, all the parishioners say that when you came, the community pentupled in size. How did you get 5 times as many people to come? And he said, when I got here, we had a coffee maker that made 15 cups. I bought one that made 60.
Yeah.
He had some other ideas too, but a lot of it just came down to, right? It's just like he's like, it's liturgy. People haven't eaten or drunk from the night before at midnight, or maybe since dinner the night before. They just want a cup of coffee, and if they got to wait in a long line, and then there's no coffee anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think if I were trying to grow a parish, I would just have coffee hour catered for 2 years. Like that's what I would do. Like just have it, get your coffee order on the app. The app goes live at the end of, the liturgy. Just come out and, people want a good coffee. They want a place to sit. That's the time to run Sunday school, is when the adults just want a little break without the kids around. Have Sunday school then, or hire a youth director to put on games and have the kids playing. They just want to run around like maniacs anyway at the end of church. So have someone let them, make that happen. Get them running around like lunatics. They love it. And then, the adults can, have some good food, so they don't have to think about that. Does mom have to go home and cook? Does dad have to go home and cook now at the end of that? They've just been in church for 2.5 hours. They're tired. So I think that's where I'd invest in, and is the coffee even any good at some of these parishes? I've had some worst coffee of my life. Who thinks that's like an investment? Like, what are we saving on by buying bad coffee?
Get good coffee from a monastery. Monks making some good coffee, right?
Yeah,
Be a relationship there.
I mean, some people got things to do. They're going to go, whatever you say, that's fine. But lots of people don't want to go. So I remember, this is years ago, but I think it's still the same at Essex in England, at the big monastery, the big Orthodox monastery of St. John the Baptist, that, it's a potluck after liturgy. Everyone is bringing enough food for their family and another family. So there's always too much food. It's good coffee. And then a few hours later, there's an akathist hymn in the church, and then there's a Sunday school, and there's the evening tea. I mean, there's stuff to do right till midnight. I think that in general, now Orthodox clergy, they're under different kind of pressure because Sunday is liturgy day, especially wedding day. So they got to go back in and, get the nose to the grindstone. But in general, the notion that people are going to come back to church on a weekday, Sunday really has to be the full service day. You got to throw all your resources at that. I remember Father Bill Chiganis from Holy Apostles in south of Chicago, him saying, he spoke to seminary when I was seminary. He said, Sunday is it. That's it. It's do or die day. He says, I do a 30-minute Bible study between orthros and liturgy for the adults. I do a really good kids sermon. I do a good adult sermon. There's another comment. Like, this is it. There's no other. It's do or die. Sunday is the Super Bowl every Sunday. And the more resources you can throw into that without making people feel like they've got to be there for it, the better.
I love it. That's so integrated. It's I know a lot of my friends and acquaintances, it's about ideas, like having the right idea. No, it's so integrated. Beauty first includes the taste of the coffee. It's not limited to fantastic theological concepts and really interesting opinions. It's the life we're living right here, right now, which we can glorify God in participation of these of good coffee with our friends.
Yeah, and I think I think it can. Yeah.
It made me think too, if the kid is wanting to do traveling sports and not be at church and that whole community gathering, once they have a good taste of that, a good taste of the community, where they're running around playing with their friends, the parents are having a good time together, they've worshiped together, it becomes the glue that holds your family together the whole week, and then the whole month, and then the whole year, and then your whole time together as a family. I think they're more willing to say, "Okay, mom, dad, I won't do traveling sports on Sunday morning. this is too valuable for me and too valuable for us.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like when they're really little, it's really it's a fantastic kind of scene. I see what you mean. Yeah.
It's almost a type of liturgy where it's like this traveling sport thing it's invasive. It doesn't fit. We have to go far away, particularly if you're in towns like where I live. Oftentimes you've got to travel far away to go to the bigger cities. But it's like it's such a burden. It's invasive. It doesn't. There's no liturgy to it. It's just overwhelming and crushing. And so you want, but the coffee hour and liturgy and worship, that's literally the opposite experience, like church. And so having the kids learn how to value that, I think is just critically important.
What are people gaining out of all these sports? I don't understand what that's even is.
Dr. Tim, can I respond to that? Is it chapter 4, chapter 5, perhaps? You talk about this dynamic of toughening our children as like they need to be prepared to accept the difficulties of life, and sports can participate in this toughening. And yes, there's teamwork. So there's a goodness first idea there that we're going to become a good team member and plow through the rest of our life successfully, knowing what strings to pull to have the right kinds of successes. You talk about the absolute necessity for a foundation in childhood piety and healthy eros as the only thing that can generate boldness that is truly life-giving. And I see that disparity around me, where sports have become a new religion. In a sense, it's participating in this incomplete truth that teamwork and hard work is going to get you there. And what else is there to do on a Sunday anyhow? I mean, and I think that's why we see I've seen a lot of locations where the people who talk about prayer are women, and not the men, because men should be busy working hard, and that's spiritual stuff. And the reality that a foundation for piety and healthy eros is the only thing that will generate the kind of boldness that we admire in the saints, in the martyrs, is really a profound reality that I think that your readers and anyone who will hear to your readers talk about it is really worth chewing on, for a long time, and how you raise your family and interact with children in general.
So it does sound like there's something good in the sports, the way you describe it, like people are learning, something. I don't want to knock that, but why was it that society was able to do without that for so many centuries, and suddenly it became like what happened there? Like, why did that get elevated? Is it because the mothers are on the workforce, and it's like, we'll let the sports socialize and discipline the kids in a way that we don't have the time to do? Is that?
I would say that seems to be part of it. I think that also the dominance of our right to be entertained and right to have a good time seems to be a component of it too. That, like, what good is life if you're not having fun right now? And sports, the cross kind of gets. The cross is kind of strangely present in sports, but the not being in sports would require the embracing of a different cross.
Kyle, do you think it's also because of family size has gotten smaller? I mean, you have 7 children, so is it like they don't have playmates, so you sort of need to like have these organized things?
Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah, when you only have one kid, I mean, you see these tendencies of people wanting to make everything about them. So you've got to socialize them, otherwise you're just hanging out with us boring adults. We want you to be somebody special, so you're going to be you know, you're going to be in the NFL or you're going to be in the NBA because you're our one prize, you know, and we're moving all resources to you or you know, um, and when you have 7 kids, those things are not possible. Anyways, we can't even do traveling sports because we would be doing it, you know. And when I say traveling sports, it means that you're not just playing sports at school throughout the week. It means it's a second experience of traveling an hour or two on the weekends. So it's a double whammy, and that would just be too destructive to our family. I mean, I would view it as kind of destructive even if I had a couple kids, but it it uh, it would be destructive right from the get go for us.
I mean, I certainly am grateful for the families who do this, like, every 4 years at the Olympics. Because these kids, from the age of 2, they're already, doing tumble salts and everything, and they got to make it in gymnastics. So I understand, some families are committed to that, and some kids really love it. It's, yeah, it's, but there's something invaluable about, I mean, yeah, what do you do? Go to a Saturday morning liturgy or something? How do you compensate for that? I don't see the. Yeah. So we've been on for about 2 hours. Is it time to come in for a landing? Because I think I'm probably.
Yeah, you've really blessed us with your time today, Dr. Tim, and you were on it much longer than I expected. So it's a great gift of your time, particularly you being in Greece and just getting back from Mount Athos. Thank you for carving out a little bit of time for us today.
Well, it really is, a pleasure to talk to you and Jonah. And Jonah and I have been friends for a long time, but I've never actually seen him. We've only met on the phone and by email, working together through St. Nicholas Press. And Kyle, it's nice to meet you too. And my nephew, Dr. Pete Patitsas, speaks so highly of you. So it's good to.
Yeah, I got to get him back on the show. He's been a real blessing and an encouragement to my life. And so he's like, you got to meet my uncle. You guys think like you value the same things. You think alike. And so he connected us, and that was a real joy. And by the way, here's the book that we've been talking about, The Ethics of Beauty. You can get it at St. Nicholas Press. And
.net.
I know you're working on a different book too. You don't have to talk about it, but we'll be praying for your next book too.
Yeah, I can't talk about it. It's a it's
Okay.
a it's a it's a fact. Authors cannot talk about their work. It doesn't work. It doesn't. You wish you could, but it's just a way of escaping it.
Right.
And you cannot escape it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Love to have you back on again sometime. And I'll be referencing this book quite a bit in future episodes with other guests because it's summarized in such a beautiful way the Orthodox worldview. So thank you for your contribution to it. My listeners, don't forget to check this out. Joni, would you like to say anything about the book in closing in our time together?
Yeah, go to stnicholaspress.net and order a copy or two.
Are there any promos going on right now for the book if they buy 2 or more?
I'm glad you asked. We've got a 20% off on $75 purchase or more going through December 6th.
Ooh, running out of time. And the promo code is capital S, capital N, capital P, 20,
20.
right? SMP 20.
There we go.
Yes.
And it'll make a great Christmas gift for people. I think so. I've already
Sure.
got a few friends that I've actually given it to, or they've purchased it themselves. So, guys, thanks for joining in, watching this stream. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share it with others. And have a blessed day. We'll see you later.